One of my earliest videos on this channel covered the disappearance of Dennis Martin, a case so widely reported on channels devoted to all things true crime and paranormal, it seems there's nothing left to be said on the subject. However, I wanted to commit one more video to the case of Dennis Martin, this time to admit that there more than likely isn't anything paranormal at all about this case, and my former video on Dennis was incorrect to imply otherwise. To recap the tragic and disturbing story of Dennis Martin, he was a 6-year-old boy who mysteriously vanished in the Great Smoky Mountains in the summer of 1969. It is often said that Dennis was abducted by a feral, sometimes cannibalistic, man living in the forest or a creature like Bigfoot. The reason why is because of a story involving one Harold Key and his family, who, while on a hike in the Smokies, allegedly witnessed such a figure carrying something over its shoulder. Something red, which matched the color of the shirt Dennis was wearing when he disappeared. Dennis and some playmates had decided to hide in the woods of Spence Field, and then jump out and scare the adults who'd brought them to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for a day of fun. Because Dennis's shirt was conspicuous, the other children had told him to hide farther away, and the next moment, he was gone. The Keys, who'd been hiking near Rowan's Creek, about 7 miles from Spence Field, witnessed the person or creature who'd allegedly taken Dennis, whose presence was announced to them by a huge, horrifying scream. In 2011, David Paulides would conduct various interviews for his Missing 411 project, which investigated the disappearances of many people in the Smoky Mountains and sought to prove the existence of Bigfoot. Paulides spoke to Bill Martin, Dennis's father, from whom we get the detail that the figure Harold Key saw was carrying something over its shoulder. No news outlet ever reported this detail. Bill claimed he got this information from Harold himself. The idea of there being feral men, that is, uncivilized humans, not cryptids like Bigfoot, in the woods, was supplied by Dwight McCarter, also interviewed by Paulides. McCarter was a seasoned tracker who'd investigated the Dennis Martin case independently, and had walked the trail between Spence Field and Rowan's Creek with Bill Martin to show it was feasible someone could have carried Dennis along that route, with the walk taking a total of 90 minutes. Now, even though McCarter stressed that the wild men he spoke of were indeed just that, men and not beasts, curious and perhaps overly imaginative internet users, since Paulides released his interviews in 2011, have run with the idea that a Sasquatch had abducted Dennis Martin. Or at the very least, one of the wild men McCarter believed in was, indeed, the culprit, and authorities don't want this getting out. One seemingly strange detail of the case used to evidence this is the fact that the Green Berets, carrying weapons, assisted with the search for Dennis. Why would they have weapons unless they were hunting something? It's sometimes asked. Furthermore, why were special forces even on the scene in the first place? Well, they were there, it turns out, because they happened to be training in the nearby Nantahala Gorge area, and were available to assist. It was simply lucky for the search effort that they were there. They were not, in fact, called upon from far away because of unusual circumstances that required their involvement, and only a fraction of the 500 men who were in the area actually helped in the search, which was mostly left to a very large and inexperienced civilian search party. The Green Berets did act alone, separate from this party, but this is hardly unusual for the military, and it seems from photos that they weren't in fact carrying military rifles or anything suitable for hunting Sasquatches. Another point often used to support the idea of a cover-up is the fact that the FBI, in the course of their investigation, withheld information from Bill Martin, who only found out about the Key sighting after reading it in the papers. However, the FBI's behavior isn't unusual here, even if infuriating for Bill Martin and us. It is standard procedure for them not to discuss an investigation with any outsiders, even family members of victims, as to preserve the integrity of the case and keep vital information secure so it can't be used by potential suspects. Though it appeared to Bill Martin the FBI were denying that Dennis was kidnapped, as he believed was the case, it could be they did believe this all along and followed up on leads supporting this, as evidenced by over 100 blacked out pages on the Dennis Martin case file. Perhaps the blacked out pages are vital information they don't want to be leaked. In other words, they never covered up a kidnapping, but investigated one covertly per protocol. Granted, one could counter the FBI are withholding the information not just for security purposes, but also because it involves Sasquatches or wild men. However, this might not be too likely, for a few reasons. Dwight McCarter's idea of feral humans, which has captured people's imaginations, is often misconstrued. For one, he claimed the wild man he knew lived in Cataloochee, nowhere near Spence Field. Further, the wild man, according to McCarter, is not as wild as YouTubers, podcasters, TikTokers, and others would have us believe. I admit I was ignorant of this and ran with a false idea of McCarter's wild men myself in my previous Dennis Martin video. But it turns out by wild, McCarter simply meant the man lived in a cabin in wooded isolation and was all around a regular-looking individual and harmless. What's more, McCarter described one wild man in Carthage, Tennessee as getting into a dirty white van, something we'd never imagine if we are to believe the popular myth of Dennis Martin being kidnapped by a creature of subhuman intelligence. McCarter got the story of the Carthage wild man and the white van from a book by Michael Bouchard, who happened to interview, in the summer of 2016, none other than Harold Key. Harold Key's words to Michael Bouchard are revealing, and work against the idea that some sort of creature kidnapped Dennis. Harold reported that before entering the woods near Rowan's Creek with his family, he spotted an empty white car on the side of the road, perhaps not dissimilar from the dirty white van apparently driven by the Carthage wild man Bouchard had also documented in his book. Harold said he saw a middle-aged man running frantically through the woods, but he was not carrying anything over his shoulder, and was not dressed in animal furs that would mark him as the popular image of a wild man. The man sped past Harold and his family and dashed into the white car, speeding off toward Cades Cove. Harold also said he heard someone scream, "Help!" up in the mountain range, at a great distance, a detail that had previously been unreported. Harold said he wouldn't even describe the man he saw as a wild man, just someone disheveled and for some reason anxious to make a getaway. Harold told Bouchard he only revealed this information to him because the FBI agents who'd been investigating the case had passed away and couldn't do anything to him. Harold was also 93 at the time of the interview, and being near the end of his life had no reason to keep secrets. The question remains why Bill Martin then said the man Harold Key witnessed was carrying something over his shoulder, even though Harold had never said this. Perhaps Mr. Martin, in his grief, just wanted to believe his son was still alive, and had convinced himself Harold had seen him. Bill was known for having faith in psychics to provide answers, so maybe he put a lot of stock in answers for which there is no evidence. So, there you have it. Almost certainly Dennis Martin was not abducted by a Sasquatch, or wild man, or at least not a stereotypical wild man covered in furs and lacking human intelligence. It seems quite possible, though, that he was indeed abducted, possibly by the man driving the white car, a theory strengthened by the fact that a woman reported seeing whom she believed was Dennis Martin, shortly after he disappeared, riding in a white car with a bald, middle-aged man. Perhaps just as likely as falling victim to abduction, Dennis could have simply become lost in the wilderness before dying of exposure, or from an animal attack. Dwight McCarter believes Dennis Martin's remains rest along West Prong Trail. for he caught the scent of a dead human body there other rangers believed was the scent of a dead crow. What's more, someone illegally hunting ginseng in the Big Hollow area, near West Prong, did report finding child skeletal remains, though he remained quiet about this for years because he was breaking the law when he made this discovery. We also shouldn't forget that Harold Key did hear a scream for help, but at a distance from where he stood at Rowan's Creek. Perhaps this was the sound of Dennis, lost and afraid somewhere deep in the Smoky Mountain wilderness. In the end, we'll probably never know what truly happened to Dennis Martin, but even if there is likely nothing paranormal about his disappearance, as social media might have us believe, and as I suggested and even firmly believed myself at one point, his story remains a horrifying and tragic one. Sadly, Bill Martin died in 2014, never knowing what became of his son. Let us now honor his son's memory by stepping back from the wild rumors surrounding his disappearance, and moving forward as we anticipate any possible answers that may come to us in the future. Thank you guys, stay safe out there, and remember, don't get scared out of sorts.